This is Michael Rogers with Film Music Magazine. I'm here with Stephen from X Japan. We are X.
We are X.
Yes. So, you start where you'd like to start in terms of your personal journey with music.
Well, my personal journey with this music, I didn't know anything about this band until my producer called me up and told me the Japanese rock band had contacted him and they wanted a documentary. So I'm like, excellent. It really kind of started with a simple Google image search, which produced hair up to here, makeup, crazy clothes.
You can swear, it's okay.
All right, crazy fucking outfits, and then you watch some videos, and it's just pyro blowing up the world, super speedy, fast music, and just stadiums full of Japanese fans jumping in the air doing this, like in unison. You know, I mean, I've never seen anything like it. So first of all, it was this spectacle. It drew me in. The music was unlike anything I'd heard before. I was not really much of a speed metal head, personally. But the real key is that it's something I'd never heard about. And I thought I had a pretty good idea about what was going on in the world of music. So it made me feel kind of stupid and made me want to know more. So I kind of said a very quick yes. And within, I think, 3 or 4 days, I was side stage at X Japan's warm-up show at the Yokohama Arena, taking it all in. I mean, it was a trip. It was a trip. And that was like 18,000 people. That's a warm-up. 2 nights sold out to get themselves ready for Madison Square Garden. Yeah, good grief.
So, your personal experience with music growing up, you are a musician.
Sort of. I mean, I played the drums growing up. So I was in, the marching band. I played in a rock band. Did jazz band. All of it was high school. It didn't really go beyond that. But worked in a record store, collected records, loved music. Similar to the members of X Japan, I did kind of dress up a little bit at one time. Not as extreme. I did kind of go a bit goth. In my later high school years, I kind of thought I was Robert Smith from The Cure, so it was very black, big hair. Toned it down when I discovered the Smiths. But yeah, it's just been a lifelong love. It's kind of one of the first things that inspires me, creative impulses as human beings. And I love stories of musicians. I like creative process. I always like to know where it comes from, how it affects people. And these films give me a chance to kind of reinvent the storytelling a little bit based on sort of the DNA of the music and the musician themselves. I kind of look to that to kind of guide me in how I'm going to tell these stories.
So let's back up just a little bit to some of your earlier work.
Yeah.
As you emphasize process, our outlet is sort of gear and tech, but it's also the creative process. It's getting inside the heads of the creators.
Right.
So going back to some of your earlier stuff, Cinemania, that was really focused on the passion for whatever it is that they're passionate about, that would be about movies.
Yeah.
And as you approach, we'll get up to this film, but as you approach your different projects, how do you, what's your process of establishing a dialogue between what they do and their general public? How do they connect emotionally?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question, because actually the way I think about that relationship, it's more about how I think of it between the audience and the film, which is similar. I mean, there's these musicians communicating to their fans, so there's already kind of like that existing fan base. What I like to think about is the non-fan and the novice and someone who's like a blank slate, and then how do I, just the way that they would through their music, connect to an audience. How do I create this chain of empathy through a portrait of a musician, their own music, to kind of an unknown, an uninitiated audience. It's a really interesting dynamic, and then also other musicians are also inspired by music and musicians. So there are these connectivities of inspiration that kind of, leapfrog through this whole process. Yeah, I don't know if there's a concrete answer to that. To that question.
You seem very intuitive. So
yeah.
Is music a language?
Oh, completely. Yeah, completely. And just the way film is a language. I like to think about the way I use film language as being very musical. I mean, again, it inspires how I craft my stuff. When I'm working with an editor who is not a musician or isn't really hip to music, I have a really hard time.
You notice the difference?
I always have a hard time. It's kind of a jagged, it doesn't really, I just keep saying, like, it's gotta be like a piece of music. It's gotta have dynamics, it's gotta flow, it's gotta have like rhythms. I was a drummer, so I'm very attuned to kind of a rhythmic sense of cutting. I mean, the best editing is musical, you know what I mean? And it should just kind of carry you along. It has to work emotionally, viscerally, all that stuff. So it's in those ways, I think, maybe that, just to answer your initial question, is how I view that relationship with between artists and audiences. I'm trying to do something similar to the music that they transmit and find something in it that's in common with what we're doing in film. So it's very abstract, but I know it makes sense somehow.
I'm right with you. Us, as we viewed this picture, is that it was way more, they're extraordinarily accomplished, so to speak, thrash metal guys. But is it because of his classical background, which I hate to emphasize this, but it felt like the connection early on as kids was almost like Lord of the Rings, that they found a way to survive together.
Yeah.
Expression.
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, like the band came together, he always says it was very organic. I mean, these were all, obviously him and Toshi, Yoshiki is the leader of the band, meaning he composes all the music, plays the drums, plays the piano, but he doesn't sing. Toshi is the vocalist, not necessarily the leader, but they met in kindergarten. So these guys have known each other since they were literally this big. Then their hair just went like up there. But you know, they found each other through music, but they developed this, they were in this community, like all these bands, they were in a moment in Japan where this kind of music was starting to bubble up. So all the members were all in different bands. And I think it was through, because Yoshiki had sort of kind of forged his strength through his pain. You know, he lost his father to suicide when he was 10, found music, started bashing the hell out of his drums and rocking really fast and hard. He became, you know, he says it even in the film, he created a stronger Yoshiki. And he just pulled the best people from all these different bands who he connected with personally. And they really formed this family unit. And it did seem like they were kind of at war with the world. And it really was a survival technique. And they were these kind of warriors in Japanese culture. Because they put on this, like, they're, you know, they're like these kind of punk samurais, you know what I mean? Because nobody was dressing like that. By doing it, they were almost inviting ridicule and harm, you know? He said, we might have worn, like, Yoshiki would literally dress in a wedding dress and pearls, but he said he could beat the shit out of anybody who fucked with them. You know what I mean? There was a real edge to that. You know, he's also a classically trained musician. So there's a strength in this music that I think you may be missing in other kinds of music like this. Like, I think it's his secret weapon in a lot of ways.
He also has that to draw on as a source.
Yeah,
it's almost
exactly.
like, you know, classically trained painters, Picasso, classically trained, but then they break out.
Exactly, exactly. He literally writes his music on a score. It comes into his head and he writes every drum beat, cymbal crash, speedo, thrash lick is literally a score. He writes it like Beethoven would write a score, and he just puts it up there. Everyone, and none of it. They all look at him like, "Are you fucking kidding?" You know, because him and Toshi were both actually trained classically. So to them, they're like, "Well, yeah, sheet music. Of course, we're going to compose our speed metal anthems." You know, just the way he would compose one of his beautiful ballads. So there's an architecture in his compositions that goes right back to these roots, and it makes her really, like, they're really solid, and they go in and stay in.
You don't forget that.
Instantly. I saw one rehearsal and I was humming every single melody and tune, even though it was really, really fast. I was like, God, they're really like, there's a complexity to this music that you don't get in a lot of other metal. You know?
So many acts follow in their inspiration.
Yeah.
Like it's just post British West Coast punk,
Mm-hmm.
right? But then they put their own kabuki flavor on it.
Yes. Don't call them hair metal.
No,
they do have hair. It's very metallic. but there's a lot of different elements. Very much inspired by Bowie and punk, British punk. The original bass player, Taiji, kind of looks a little bit like 3 or 4 members of Guns N' Roses squished into one, but the others definitely had more of like an eye towards what was happening in the UK, stylistically.
More like Ziggy.
More like Ziggy, very much influenced by Bowie, by the band Japan from England, you know, like David Sylvian and Vic Karn. They loved Iron Maiden. You know, they're kind of contemporaries with Metallica, so they were kind of coming up at the same time. So yeah, and Kiss, of course, was everything.
This one was his first record.
Yeah. Mine too. So.
Yeah, I think mine was Destroyer.
Oh yeah. Yoshiki, Toshi, and me all bought Love Gun first. Yeah.
Okay. So you emphasize process, your process. How did you and he advance that dialogue process? In other words, he seems very specific in his vision, but he's not a soloist. He's working with a band.
Right.
So how does he communicate to his bandmates and to you and to the creative?
How does he communicate to his bandmates? He stands up on his drum riser and shouts at everybody.
He says, do this, right?
Yeah.
I love that scene where it was, we got 1 hour, where are the string players?
Yeah. Where are the string players? Then he gets all the band together and he says, all right, now I'm going to rehearse the drum solo for 10 solid minutes. Classic.
Just goes and has a beer.
Yeah. We were kind of miraculously left alone to do our thing. So
you were left alone?
We were kind of left alone to do our thing. I mean, the vision of the film is my vision. I mean, he's a visionary in what he does. And I think to his credit and part of his genius was to figure out when to just take his hands off it. You know, he had so much to do with doing the concert, getting his new album ready. I think we established a level of trust pretty early on. Our producer is very accomplished. John Batzek, 2 Oscars, nominated this year for one of the producers on Winter on Fire. He was shortlisted for Listen to Me, Marlin, which was here last year. He's the best. So that helped us out a lot. Like, you want your Oscar?
Yeah.
You listen to us. Yeah, that was really great because we really needed the space to figure it out. We had almost no pre-production going in.
That's
3 days.
This was a new band.
Yeah, 3 days. I did a little, I saw the show in Yokohama, so I went, oh my God, what have I got myself into? Because he really does, command this whole crazy world around him. And the band members and just everything is orchestrated perfectly, but also within total chaos at all times.
Yes.
So you think, how is any of this going to get done? We're never going to finish this film. He'll never sign off on anything. And
was that part of his process? He was looking to sign off on decisions you made, or did he leave you alone?
No. We thought that might actually be coming down the pike, but we really were left to do our own thing.
Fantastic.
Yeah. He made suggestions, and he'd say, "Oh, I'd like to," It was his idea. He got into this headspace where he really thought we should just visit as many dead people as possible. We just thought, oh my
great feat.
Goodness, grave after grave after grave. But eventually, you're like, this is amazing. It really, because
it made it a different film.
It's not really a film about music. It's really his story. It's the story of his friendship, and it's the story of a man and a musician haunted by death, and trying to find a way through it. Through his music in a way that will kind of save and inspire his fans.
Well, it's not dissimilar from themes in DC and Marvel.
Yeah. And as you see, he's kind of transformed by Stan Lee into this superhuman musician character, which, we touch on lightly, but it becomes definitely a thematic, recurring motif.
And you also danced with some of the Darkness and Exile Stones film.
Yeah.
So that could inform some of these decisions.
A little bit. I wish we could have gone. I wish we could have gone darker.
Yeah.
But that's a whole different conversation about the fact that we only had an hour to tell the story of this magnificent album. But that was amazing because it's like the story of one record. Here we're dealing with an entire career, almost 2 careers because they have this death and rebirth. It's a lot of story, a lot of story.
Did he get into conversation much? I mean, you sort of touched on it in some moments about his inner emotional process tying in suicide, and what's did he talk about? So, why does this keep happening, and why is it?
It's really interesting. I mean, we literally could have thrown at least 3 or 4 more bodies onto the body count pile. There's a lot more stories of death and tragedy kind of lingering around him. You know, from a teenage friend who borrowed his new motorcycle, who crashed it and died a day later, to one of the original guitarists of X who quit, and then met up with him years later in Los Angeles and reminisced about old times and thought, shoot, I should have stayed in the band, look how rich and famous you are. Oh well, let's take a picture, see you later, good buddy. A month later, dies of a heart attack. And like the only picture he had in his wallet was of Yoshiki and him together. You know, it's like these little stories just kept creeping up and you think, oh my god.
He must feel like a phoenix, almost like,
yeah.
I don't want to interact with people because they might
After a point, I was
they might die. Right?
I'm keep my stand over here.
Exactly. Do I want to do this film?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like, oh, tricky. Wearing like garlic or something. I don't know. Exactly. I can break the curse. But yeah, it's weird. And he always would say, like, I mean, looking at his history and his frailty, and you know, he literally headbanged so hard he had to have neck surgery, and he'd always say, like, I'm not supposed to be alive. Why do you all keep dying? I'm not supposed to be here. It's crazy. But he is, and so as kind of haunted and kind of driven by this death drive, it's ironically kind of the opposite, because well, he's like, well, if I'm still here, I have to keep doing it. Music keeps me alive, therefore it helps keep other people alive, and I must continue to like almost, it's like he keeps throwing himself on the sacrificial altar of music to kind of regenerate and to, it's like he's sacrificing himself for his audience. I mean, and I'm not even exaggerating, it sounds...
He would pass out, he would play so hard.
Yeah, it kind of sounds cheesy, but I've never seen a fan base like this, where it really is almost like a religious experience.
Very much so.
Yeah, it's like everyone we interviewed, they're like, yeah, my father died, I listened to their music, it helped me, it helps people prevent them from killing themselves. It saves and changes people. I mean, and that is, it can't be a coincidence that he's got this kind of, this weird power because of all of the things he's been through.
So they're so effective at communicating that, obviously, you know, through that language. What's his version of why it didn't break out globally?
His version?
Because it's a universal conceit. You know.
You would think so. And I think Gene Simmons puts it aptly, and I think he's completely right. I mean, it's a language thing. The West has his prejudice against Japanese musicians.
But also obsessed with animation and other cultures.
Yeah, I mean, it's shifting. You know, it's become like a subcultural phenomenon, but, you know, it's not like they're a household, you know, anime or like cosplay, you know, is, you kind of, you say it and people get it, and I think the culture in anime and that level of the culture has somehow been more accepted, because I think it rides alongside of, you know, comics and like Marvel and Batman, Superman, all the superhero culture that we have. There's kind of a crossover, whereas like a Japanese rock band from the late 80s, 90s who dress like that, and you know, the music might not sound as contemporary as maybe things that are happening now.
It's almost like they were ahead and then things caught up with
Yeah,
them.
they were kind of ahead, and then they were very much behind. I mean, when they broke up, it was when the internet was born.
Yes.
So, you know, that's like a 10-year arc where people the music kind of started to spread virally around the globe. And they did kind of seed a huge cult fan base around the world, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they've broken in the West. I mean, it's hard enough for a new band to make it these days. You know, and they're all pushing 50 and trying to like break America. It's an uphill battle. It's a challenge. But like he said, like he's just gonna keep trying, and he just doesn't care.
It's not
necessarily like he needs to be famous in America. He just feels like, you know, how many more corners of the globe can I push my music into? You know, he never slows down. It's an unbelievable drive. And it's also, when you see the film, he does say it in the movie, that the 2 members of the band who are no longer with us were really into the idea of trying to break the West. They were really driven. And so he almost feels compelled for them
to
keep fucking trying,
Yes.
you know? And I don't think it's, I completely buy it. I really see that drive in
Oh,
it.
it's a sincere
To do
motivation.
it.
For sure.
Yeah.
The ghosts that continue to haunt him are, he almost feels responsible to caretake for them. Puts Hide up in big shows, if he's allowed to.
Oh,
fans expect it.
Fans expect it. I mean, the band, there are 5 living humans on stage, but there are 7 members of X, you know? The 2 other guys are still there.
Members.
When Sugizo, who's an amazing guitar player, he's in a band called Luna Sea, which is another great progressive heavy rock band that Yoshiki signed to his label Ecstasy Records in Japan. I mean, Yoshiki's like the godfather of this whole scene,
Sure.
and they're one of the bands that came up under his umbrella. And Sugizo eventually started filling in reunion shows as a guitar player. And then Yoshiki eventually asked him to join the band, and he just thought, I can't step in, Hide's shoes are too big, I can't replace him. And Yoshiki said, you're not replacing him, he's still in the band, you're the 6th member. So he went, oh, got
That
it.
I can do.
I'm in. Yeah, so
And
that's how that works.
They inspired like Meshuggah and so many of these technically proficient bands.
Yeah, yeah.
Sepultura,
Mhm.
who respect and honor those guys. Did you feel in your process that it was ever going to end? I mean, like, it seemed like, well, certainly it's continuing on. But in your filmmaking process, did you have a clear picture of this is where we're headed, this is where I want to get to?
Well, luckily, they did play Madison Square Garden. So we had that little, you know,
Launch point.
they're starting to rehearse. It's kind of somewhat going off the rails. They're always late. They don't, you know, it's not necessarily a can they make it kind of edge of your seat, but you see this progression towards what is supposed to be their big debut. So at least we had that. We kind of found the ending just by chance, by sort of, yeah, I don't know. It was more of like a feeling, because what we do is we kind of get you to, we sort of get you to that moment where you think it's going to burst into a big triumphant performance, and we kind of subvert it a bit, using Hide's last statement, where like the band really doesn't begin or end. You know what
That's
I mean?
what I'm getting, right?
Yeah, it kind of gave me this feeling. Oh, this could almost be like an ellipse, and that what you see at the end is the very beginning and the very end of the show sort of mashed up together, and you get that final coda that kind of just summarizes the ethos of the band and their fans, and you know what they really represent. So it ended more of on like a philosophical note, which was kind of what we were kind of gunning for ultimately.
Well, that theme runs through it, and Hide's statement is sort of the spirit of that. It seems almost like a transcendental Buddhist, you know,
Oh, totally.
energy.
He was dressed like Susie Sue
Yes.
on acid, you know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like the most fantastic looking character in the whole
But
world.
there was the way he was. There was a scene where he was walking with children.
Mhm.
You know, he just had that Peter Pan kind of.
Yeah,
vibe.
yeah. He was. There was a childlike kind of vibe to him sometimes, despite like they say that's kind of scary, crazy, you know, acid, punk on acid kind of like vibe. He was really sweet and kind. They called him the mother of the band. I mean, you can't really.
I see.
It doesn't really make sense at first, but then you get that sense of who he was. And it's true, he absolutely adored his fans. Like, Japan was devastated when he died. I mean, when I saw that footage, which is in the film of the funeral,
Yeah.
I mean, it's absolute cultural pandemonium.
Jumping off buildings.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. He meant so much to them. So yeah, a fascinating character, and really, we had his picture everywhere in the edit suite. I think he's my screensaver.
Nice.
I just figured I wanted to keep him there to kind of watch over the whole process. Yeah.
So let's wind up. As you experienced Yoshi and Toshi interacting with the American music machine, it's very different from the Japanese world. What was that dialogue?
How so? You mean
Well,
like
it's kind
like the business side of
Yeah,
things?
because once a major label takes you on, it's basically their machine.
Right.
So how do they work all that sort of beautiful synchronicity into the American machine?
It didn't. I mean,
That was my
it still
question.
hasn't worked. Yeah, I mean, you see them sign a deal to Atlantic in the early '90s,
Yes.
and you think they're gonna like roll out the red
we're
carpet.
the great
and just-
Atlantic promotion machine.
Yeah, they're gonna blow it up, but it never happened. Partly maybe Yoshiki's to blame, and they couldn't, like you said, they couldn't deliver an English language album properly. Yeah,
for them to market.
yeah, and maybe Lang didn't do it right. I mean, who knows? I mean, we haven't really picked apart what really went wrong, but a lot potentially could have, and it culturally probably just wasn't the right time.
Again, there may be.
Yeah, but now it's like a whole new world with you know, social media, music on the web. There's no rules. I mean, I think anything could really happen at this point with these guys, and I think starting here is a really good place.
Great launch.
Because you know the film will help you get to know them, and hopefully create a lot of empathy, like I was saying earlier, between audiences and musician,
Yes.
so that you'll feel closer to them, and they won't just be this abstract, strange-looking. Oh, we're these middle-aged guys in leather on a billboard. They'll be real human beings, and it'll be a story that draws you in, and then you'll want to headbang all day.
Thank you so much for your story.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate seeing you.
Pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.
You gotta give an X. You gotta do an X.
Oh, so let's get that. I was thinking we gotta do that. Ready?
On
Ready?
your
It's 1, 2, 3.
marks.
We are.
We are.
X.
That's good.